Hello, and welcome to She Leads Biotech, the podcast that celebrates women leaders in the bioscience space. I'm your host, Sharon Cox, CEO and Managing Director of CNA International, based right here in New York. And each week I'll be talking to women leaders about their work, their triumphs and challenges, providing invaluable insight into how women can unlock their superpowers and succeed on their own terms. So whether you're navigating your own career path in bioscience or you're passionate about science and innovation, I hope you're empowered and inspired by each episode. My guest today is a patients-first systems thinker who turned an early grounding in market analytics into a career, leading high-impact launches and guiding strategy across some of the biggest names in pharma, where she built a reputation for curiosity, speed to insight, and the ability to see round corners. Her father's journey with frontotemporal dementia sharpened her purpose and her obsession with the full patient and caregiver experience, not just the FDA milestone. Today, she helps founders and teams commercialize earlier and smarter by mapping real-world barriers and aligning science with access and outcomes. So please welcome Chief Commercial Officer, Deanna Angello. Hey, Deanna. Hi, how are you?
Sharon, I'm doing well. How are you?
Yes, I'm doing very well indeed on this Friday afternoon. Looking forward to the weekend coming.
Indeed.
And where am I talking to you from? Where are you based?
I'm in Washington, D.C.
Oh, okay. Interesting place to be at the moment.
You can say that.
Well, listen, I've followed your story and I've seen your posts on LinkedIn and I know some elements of your story, which is fascinating. And I really want to delve into you as a person. So tell me about your journey, because I know you've spent a lot of time in some of the biggest names in pharma. You've spent a lot of time in Pfizer, J&J. I'm sure there's another. Genentech, right?
Yeah.
You've been with them. So how did you start in this field and what did that journey look like for you?
So how it started was actually when I was in business school. I remember interviewing with Pfizer for the summer MBA internship, which I got, and had a fantastic summer working in New York City at Pfizer. And my career really started, I actually really didn't know about the pharmaceutical industry. I don't want to date myself, but
Believe me, most people I speak to have said, I didn't have a clue when I started with it.
yeah, I mean, I just got an email yesterday from somebody from my alma mater that just graduated and said, I really want to pick your brain about being in the industry. And I'm like, I had no idea when I graduated from college that this isn't even an industry. No, but that said, coming out of or entering into business school, talking to Pfizer, at the beginning of business school, then spending my summer there, I was very fortunate to receive an offer to come back after I graduated into their 2-year leadership development rotational program, where I had the opportunity very early on in my career to get breadth and depth across the industry, but also have exposure to senior leaders at Pfizer, many who have gone on to be CEOs of well-known Fortune 50 companies as well as biotech companies. So
Right.
I think that experience really shaped the trajectory of my career and my interests and how I looked at opportunities.
Yeah. And I think certainly companies like Pfizer offer a really good training ground. It's a really good way to get your feet in and get your feet wet, but very protected. They're very specific, training courses and coaching courses and things like that. So it's a really good grounding for starting you off in the industry. Were there any specific departments that you worked in? Where did you find your sort of place?
Yeah, it's so interesting because of what I do now. My MBA was actually not in what I actually do. It was in finance. So actually I do a lot of strategy, but I other than the required marketing classes, I did not major in marketing. But what I found the key to my success was and continues to be that I always had a high degree of curiosity. So that rotational program set me up with early on. I was doing business development, working on licensing deals and M&A, did a lot of commercial strategy work. I had some global experience in the Japan, Asia region. But my last rotation and where before I got out of the program, I always say really is the foundation for a lot of things in industry is what we call the market analytics role. So it was market research, secondary data. And to me, that's where a lot of strategy comes from customer insights, knowing how to ask those questions, knowing how to look at the data. And for me, that's advice I always tell people when they ask me about the industry. I always say I think that's a group that everybody should spend time in because you're always taking insights, whether you're at the senior level, entry level, mid level, understanding your customer. And, I always joke that when I started in the industry, it was one decision maker, one message, one value prop, and that was the doctor. And, Sharon, I think we both know in the world we live in today, there are multiple decision makers in the healthcare system. There's a lot of influencers as well as enablers. But knowing how to have those insights, strategically put them together to figure out your competitive advantage and whatever, whether you're a therapeutics company, a device company, a health tech company, is really, to me, the key to success. And that's something that I'm very grateful that I learned very on how important that was. And I've carried those skills with me. And in fact, I will say that when I was at Pfizer, my colleagues who knew that I had spent time, and once I moved to marketing, they'd always joke with me because I'd say, well, how long is it going to take to do market research in X, Y, and Z? And they'd often say, that's going to take 3 months. I would say, oh, I know how to speed this up. And I know, the ways. And they're like, I hate you. It was joking. It's like, I know I can't BS with you. I'm like, oh, I know the way to get it done more quickly. And especially I've always was fortunate to be on blockbuster products. You learn a lot. It's also very high pressure when you're on those high visibility products that are the growth drivers for the company.
Right. And so you were kind of AI before AI was invented then. I could
Yes,
speed that up.
exactly. Yeah, I'm like, oh, I know we can get it done in 6 weeks. So
We
tell
could
me
do that. We could do that sooner. No problem at all.
exactly.
You spent a great deal of your career, you said there, in sort of high impact areas, big blockbuster thing. That must have come with a lot of stress, a lot of got to be everywhere doing everything. How did you find that period and how did you handle it?
That's a great question. And I'll break that down into how I initially handled it, what it did to me, and how I handle it now.
Okay.
So,
Sounds like I might have an exclusive coming out here.
yes. So, as I said, I started my career at Pfizer. So, for those that may not know, it's headquartered in New York City. So, the pace of everything in New York, I always say, the bar in New York or the pace at which things go or so quickly and it gets normalized. And the bar for good, what may be normal somewhere else, is actually normalized is this really high level of moving
Yep.
fast. And, I think I was in my career is first starting out as an individual contributor and then, of course, moving to a people manager, which probably one of the toughest transitions in my career. It was, I think, there were times in which I didn't know how to handle it. I was trying to juggle life. I had some personal things going on. During that time, my father was diagnosed with a awful terminal disease. And I think what I learned and how I manage it now is you have to unplug. So I say that a lot. I think that New York go, go, go mentality, which is everywhere in Manhattan, there's a pro and a con to that.
Oh, believe me, I know.
Exactly. I mean, in some ways I love it. I always say when I step back, when I get off the train and come back to New York City, I step right back into my Manhattan ways. It's like I've never left. But I think it does take a toll on you. So learning how to recharge yourself was something that I had to learn to do. A mentor once said to me, Deanna, sometimes you have to go slow to go fast. And that was a hard lesson for me. It's not like that's anything they teach you in school and again, when you're surrounded by high achieving people all the time and the bar is so high, it can take a toll on you. And it did.
Yep. Yep.
But I learned the importance of also drawing boundaries. Um, everybody's life looks different. And whether you're married, kids, no kids, elderly parents, sick parents, what have you, we all have things that we have to manage. So being able to be comfortable speaking up and drawing those boundaries, that was another lesson that I learned. And I think the last thing that I would say that I also learned during that period of time that was actually transformative for me, I used to, dating myself again, but the old BlackBerry, remember those days?
I had a Motorola. I didn't even have. I used to play Star Trek with my phone, just flip it over and pretend to beam me up, Scotty.
I love the BlackBerry. They actually had to. I think I was one of the last people at Pfizer to hand in my BlackBerry. That I went kicking and screaming to the iPhone. But that said, when I would go on vacation, I was constantly on my phone. And there's a moment that I remember, and then another one. I was at Crater Lake. My friend and I used to do all these road trips. And it was like, Crater Lake, if you've ever been there, is beautiful. And I was on that BlackBerry and it was snowing. And I didn't even know it was actually uh, unreal that it was snowing. We were there in September. And she's like, oh my God, we can't get into this entrance. And I was like, I had my head down in that BlackBerry. And she's like, Deanna, you got to get off that BlackBerry. And, it's sort of a wake up call for me. And she actually took my BlackBerry for the rest of the trip.
All right.
And, I think when you look back, I realized like you do not have to always be plugged in. And I think what was really illuminating for me is I went to New Zealand. I'm a huge hiker. I love climbing mountains. And I went to New Zealand for 3 weeks. It was the first time in my life I took a vacation that long. And I remember before I went out, I told the team and all my agency partners, don't copy me on every email. Before I come back, I just want one summary. And that sounds simple, but for somebody who was I didn't want, 3,000 emails to go through.
Yeah.
For me, it was the beginning of learning how to set boundaries. And you know what? It was all okay. But most importantly for me, I had no access to that BlackBerry. I was up in the mountains. I was climbing around. And that was the first time in my life that like I went on a vacation and completely unplugged.
Yeah, and it's so important to do. Funny story. The first time, obviously, I'm in recruitment, so a very high pressure sales, or it was back in the. I'm now going to date myself in the 80s and 90s, before there were even phones and God knows what else. And it was so competitive, and I managed a branch of people and stuff, and I took a vacation. It was like, okay, I'm going to take a vacation. 3 weeks I'm going to take. And the company were very good about it. They were like, yeah, no, that's fine. And I wasn't expecting them to be that good about it. They were like, no, it's no problem. And I said, well, and then I pushed it and I said, well, maybe it could do like a month or something. And again, they were like, yeah, no problem. That's fine. So I went off on my month's vacation and came back to find that they'd eliminated my job, which I was like, So I'm not sure whether or not they had planned to eliminate my job before I went on the vacation, or because I took the vacation, they eliminated my job. But gosh, it was forever after that I ever took a vacation again. It was almost like, no, my phone is here. Honestly, it's here. Until I realized it actually was the company, and it was a very toxic company anyway. So I shouldn't have really expected it. But it wasn't me,
right.
So so, to actually take that time. Otherwise, all you're going to end up doing is being a basket case because the stress levels and everything that you're under, right? You've got to be able to unplug, and you've got to be able to feel good about unplugging, because otherwise it's not worth it, right?
It is not.
I do want to ask you if you're prepared to talk about it, because I know we had a very brief conversation about your dad's illness and how that was diagnosed and that impact that it had on you kind of rethinking your how you show up and how you do. Are you able to talk about that?
Oh yeah, no, I definitely am. I mean, it was such a long journey, so I kind of take you through and how it really fuels how I think about my life, how I think about the work, truly how it really illuminated my purpose. And I don't want to say that it's kind of unique that I was already in the drug industry and he got this terminal illness, but I can remember very clearly when he got diagnosed after 5 years of circling through the healthcare system.
And he has the same illness as Bruce Willis, right? He had
Right.
that
Yeah. Yeah.
frontal lobal
Yeah.
dementia,
Frontotemporal dementia, which
right?
is often called dementia of middle age with onset in your 50s, but there are cases of it where people are diagnosed in their 30s and 40s. Yeah.
Yeah, and that must have been a shock diagnosis.
Yes. Yes. I had never heard of FTD other than it being a flower company. And, I think the blessing, I was at Pfizer when he got diagnosed, and we were going to have a family meeting with the doctor the next day. And my mom said it was often referred to as Pick's disease. I believe the person that founded its last name may have been Pick's, if I'm remembering correctly, but now it's frontotemporal dementia. And I remember the night before, Googling it, and I knew what it meant. And, I was fortunate to be surrounded by so many medical experts at Pfizer. Earlier in my career, I had worked on Aricept, which is a leading Alzheimer's drug to treat certain symptoms of Alzheimer's, not disease modifying. So, I knew going into that meeting what it meant, but it wasn't until the moment that the doctor said what he had. And, I remember two things about that. And this also goes into why patient centricity is such a huge part of how I work,
Yep.
how I think about what I do today, how I am always thinking about that patient. I remember that the doctor, so my mom was with my dad, and my brother, sister, and I all in different locations on the phone. So this is before Zoom days. It must have been a WebEx.
Gosh, whatever that was back then, yeah.
Right. And, my dad at this point had already had the disease. We finally were going to get an answer. And he went through it. It was just like, he failed this test, this test, this test. And I remember he didn't tell my dad that his kids were on the phone, and then basically gave us this life altering information,
Yeah.
and you're supposed to go on with your day.
Yeah.
He said, any questions? And I remember my dad saying, yeah, where are my kids? So they must have mentioned something. And I just thought, God, how awful. And talk about a bedside manner too. And I do remember my dad, I'm Italian, and my dad is this tall, Italian guy, very athletic. And, when you get diagnosed with any type of dementia, at least in the state of Pennsylvania where I grew up, they do take your driver's license. I don't know that I can say what my dad said when they said that that they were going to have to take his license. But, I just remember that moment. And
Yep.
I was actually traveling for work, and I was filming a print ad for the drug that I was working on. And I was in Miami, and it was, God, I remember it was I felt like 110 degrees. But I remember afterwards getting off that call and walking out to the beach before I went to the shoot, and just thinking, wow, our life as we know it just changed. Years. That journey he was given 2 years to live. It went on for 13 years. So,
Oh, wow.
he was basically a vegetable.
And so he was there, but not there. You've got the physical person,
Right.
but yeah, sometimes that's even harder, isn't it?
Yes.
I know my father had a road accident. He got hit by a drunk driver and received brain damage. And it wasn't that he was a vegetable from the outset, but it made me think, because the first thing that the doctors said was he's never going to be able to drive again. And that was his business. He had a haulage company, so that was his business. And they said, you're not going to be able to drive again. And he got so irate. And because it was a brain injury, they gave him back his license. He kept his license, but thankfully, he kept forgetting every day that he'd been a driver, and but then he would remember, but he'd only remember it for about, it felt like 5 minutes. It was probably longer than that, but as we were kids, kind of going, God, let's hope he doesn't remember and decide he's going to get into a car, because they allowed him to legally keep his driver's license on the basis that he would never remember to get in a car to actually drive, which I thought was a little bit worrying.
Right.
And it's funny, he very similar to your dad. Obviously, his wasn't an illness, his was from an accident.
Mhm.
And he lived for many years after, probably 15 years after the accident, he lived for. But I always remember thinking, and I felt so guilty for thinking it, that I actually wished he died at the accident, because the longer it went on, the more I lost my dad, because he just wasn't there. And it really changes you, right? You just think,
it changes you so much. Lost my dad during COVID, so I actually did make a big decision to, the start of COVID. I mean, I feel like there were multiple phases of COVID. So, like in 2020 when it started, and none of us knew what was coming next or when.
Yeah.
I was actually living across the country in San Francisco, and I was somebody who was always on a plane, flying here, there. It was not a big deal to me. But when COVID hit, we never know. Even when somebody is terminally ill, you never know when they're going to go. But I just had this sinking feeling that the end was near, and I did not want to be 3,000 miles away. So I orchestrated a whole move during the early days of the pandemic, or in 2020, and I moved back to the East Coast to be close to within driving distance of where my parents were. And I was really glad that I did that. I had no idea what was next. I mean, but I just knew that was what I needed to do. And my dad passed about a year later after I came back. I thought, I think with diseases where, particularly the patient with any type of neurodegeneration or dementia, sometimes I don't know, I have different thoughts on this, because I always question. I'm like, doctors say, don't worry, they don't know what's happening. And I do question that a little bit, because I'm like, well, he isn't able to talk, so how do we know what he's feeling or not feeling? But it is tremendously hard on the family and the loved ones, and I it's a weight. It's such a weight, because as you said, every time I came home, I would see the decline more and more.
And you'd lost just a little bit more of him.
Yes. And but you got to keep going, Sharon, right? You still have to keep living life. And it's this sort of tug of war. And I thought when he did pass, I had just started a new job, and I literally got the call that I needed to get home, that this was it. And that's for anybody who's gone through that is the most excruciating thing, to get up every day. Is today the day? And, he passed away, and I thought, I had been grieving for so long. I didn't think that there was, I know a lot of people, unfortunately, we all say that, this is a club nobody ever wants to belong to, but nonetheless, we can relate, to having a loved one with this disease. And, it just set me on a whole different path in my life and my career. I think for anybody who's lost a parent or a spouse or a child, I think for many, at least for me, you come out of it. I mean, grief is a weird thing, but I do think if you're lucky and you ride the waves of grief, I do think that it also offers a lot of clarity to life, what decisions you want to make in your life, how you want to live your life. And for me, I came out of it. I was already working in healthcare, have just doubled down on, really, at the end of the day, like, there's so many people working in healthcare. And people are driving towards an FDA approval or an authorization or what have you. And I've seen it in my career. I'm like, that's a critical milestone. But if you don't understand that patient journey and all the barriers and hurdles that a patient has to jump through and their caregiver on their way to a diagnosis, to a proper medication, if there is one, or a clinical trial.
Yeah.
Staying on it. If you don't truly understand that, the patient, there may be an FDA approval, but if the patient ultimately can't benefit from it for whatever reason, because there's too many hurdles, then it's not a win.
What's the point? Yeah.
It's not a win. Like, that's terrific. You got that FDA approval. But what I live for is to change people's lives, to really understand that. And, going back to a question you asked me earlier, when I started my career and I mentioned doing a market analytics role, or I did market research, and there's something called ethnographic research, where you actually follow a patient around. It's pretty in-depth market research, but you really want to get in and understand what is life like for this person. And that's, to me, to make real change in anything, but particularly healthcare, you really have to understand that patient journey, to be able to, remove those barriers. And for folks that I've worked with, one of the things I always say, I do consider it a privilege to work in this industry. And not only is it our job to launch product X or to grow product X, but our job is to truly understand that patient journey and how many pain points they have into getting our therapy. And we need to remove those, to the extent that, there are some that, a biopharma company just aren't able to remove, but we can work on behalf of them. And that's really my guiding light for, my dad certainly, is no longer here, but I know what I went through, what my family went through. And it is a horrible, horrible disease.
Yeah. And you're that torchbearer. Do you feel that you're the torchbearer now to continue to work for that on behalf of the patient and the patient's family as well? You're not a drug developer yourself. No. That's not what you do.
No.
But your skill set enables you to think in the mind of the family and the patient and look for those solutions.
Yes, very much so.
Cool. Yes. Would you consider yourself a risk taker?
Yes, definitely.
Can you give me an example? Why would that be?
Let's see. Personally and professionally, I'll give you professionally. I remember when I had an opportunity. I was at Pfizer for 12 years, I think, and everything was going great there. I had a great career, but I was approached by Genentech for a really interesting role, not really your everyday role. It was for the first time in Genentech's career, they were facing biosimilar competition. So, prior to the ACA, and if I remember correctly, it was called the BC, Biologics Competitive Pricing Act. There's some act that prior to that, there was no regulatory pathway for a biologic had indefinite patent protection. So, I had this opportunity to lead Genentech through their largest competitive threat that they had ever faced, because prior to that, the organization had only known growth. They are, incredible what they were able to do for, particularly in the field of oncology, with, flagship brands such as Herceptin for breast cancer, Rituxan, Avastin, multiple indications. So I took the job. I moved 3,000 miles away from everything that I knew, to, it's United States. For those that know East Coast, West Coast, they're very
it's complete. Might as well be different continents.
Yes. And I remember as I was doing it, I think every time, whether you move across the street to the company across the street, every time you move jobs, it's a risk, to throw your life upside down. And then to just go into such a high pressured, high visibility job at a company where you're not known. And I'll tell you what is very difficult are these positions of change management. So coming in and being the bearer of the news that, hey, biosimilars are coming. And what was different with biosimilars versus generic, they're more expensive. So if a company decided to go into producing biosimilars, it wasn't cheap to do like generics. So there's far more people producing generics versus biosimilars. But they were also going to be promoted. When you have to deliver the message to an organization that, hey, I used to say there's a bullet train coming, and it's a matter of time, we can prepare for it, and how we navigate this, because eventually biosimilars will be just as accepted as generics. That's a really, really hard, looking back on that. I used to joke with my boss. I said, you're lucky I like a challenge. I said, because if I had $1 for every person that I encountered in the organization of, I could never do your job, Deanna. I could never do your job. I said, I'd be retired. I wouldn't even have to work. So I do like a good challenge, but like taking that risk, leaving what you know, personally, professionally, and jumping into such a high stakes job for there was no playbook for it. It wasn't like I was launching a new product and hey, there's sort of the certain
here's the manual kind of thing to follow. Yeah.
I had to establish myself. I had to build trust across many different stakeholders. This was a cross-organizational role. I had to learn, obviously their products. I had to learn I always say the invisible things that, the ways of a company operates, that there is no manual for. You only learn that by sort of being there. So yeah, I do consider myself a risk taker in many things that I've done afterwards. But I think with great risk also comes great reward.
The opportunity for reward. Yeah, absolutely. Right. I did it myself at 55, packed up and traveled 3,500 miles to come and live in New York to start a business. No clients, no companies, no anything. And it's scary, but if you calculate it and you look at the risk v reward, then you take that choice. Which kind of brings me on to I think where you are at the moment, and I know we talked about that right at the beginning, you're on a kind of career defining path. Mm-hmm. Would that be fair to say? I think looking at what is right for Deanna, what will fulfill you in all of these experiences that you've had, to combine your kind of professional experience and the journey that you've had with the reality of what personal circumstances brings. Would that be a fair assessment? Yeah. And what does that look like for you? Do you that importance of defining your own path in your career?
Yes. So I think first and foremost is what you just said is defining your own path and being comfortable with it. And I can tell you, since my father's death, I have navigated a lot of roads. And the one thing that came out to me as I was navigating, particularly in the early days of coming out of that, on the other side of that, was when I look back at the red thread in my career, I have always led with curiosity. I'm a lifelong learner. You take those assessments. I think Strength Finders is one that comes to mind. Like that learner is high on my list. And I think what it was for me and where I am now is just realizing there's no right or wrong answer to your path. As I was seeking advice, and I knew I was at a pivotal moment in my life, and I know we talked about it before, but it was, I want to mention it here. I was hiking in the Dolomites, and this was my first vacation post-COVID after my dad had died. And, I was at the time working at a large global company. And it was the first time, mountains are always my happy place. Like, I just had this moment of clarity of like, what am I doing? And, I took that and I came back and I really recognized the importance of me defining my path. I was getting advice and people were like, you do this and you do that. And then I'm thinking, but I never did that. And when I look back on my career, when I think of all those moments when you have your annual review or development opportunities, it was more like, I've never been a check the box, do this job, then that job. I've allowed my curiosity, my willingness to take risks to do, I don't know, I get energy from that white space of defining like, oh my God, we've never done this before. I mean, at Genentech, then I went on to lead Alzheimer's. They had two disease modifying assets that were in phase 3. Unfortunately, they ultimately failed. But it's like, how do we bring this to market or something that's never been done before? And I
Yep.
think where I am right now, it's also too recognizing when you reach a certain point in your career, like, wow, I have a lot of experience. And how can you use that experience, to align to your passion and your purpose, which I got very clear on. But also, it's the point where I was really fortunate, as you mentioned, to work at some of the best companies in the industry,
Yep.
learn and work alongside so many outstanding people. And how do you take that now? And for me, it's about being able to build something, being part of the leadership team that's building something that's truly transformative to take healthcare and, most importantly, impact patients' lives in a way that we haven't seen. And
Mm.
that's where I am right now. But I will say it is getting comfortable with, I've always charted my own path. And I think when you get comfortable with that and realize, along the way, I had conversations with people. I'm like, okay, maybe they thought I was crazy for veering off what looked like
A safe path.
a safe path.
Yep.
Yeah, I think it goes back to what you said about that risk taking. And, first I would get annoyed in those conversations. Then I realized, you know what? They're not necessarily, and it's not a bad thing. They're not necessarily a risk taker. They're not necessarily, and everybody has different priorities. Not everybody has flexibility to do, certain things. But for me, I went from a place of like, I was getting tired of being questioned because I realized I was asking a lot of people who maybe were on a safe path that couldn't understand the path I was on. What was important, Sharon, and what I've been doing for the past couple of years is really building a new network of people, entrepreneurs, people who are builders, people, the investment world. How are we looking? I mean, it's no secret in the United States, we really need to shake up healthcare, across the board.
Yep.
Yeah, so it was putting myself in, educating myself too. I really wanted to learn about venture capital to, as you go into earlier stage stuff, it's important to walk the talk and be able to speak it and understand how that happens, from a seed company all the way through to, Series C, D, when do they IPO? What does that look like? So I invested time in that. I did a year-long program to understand that. I work with so many different accelerators and founders, CEOs. I also am very big on leadership development. And, for myself, I think we're all a work in progress. I got certified in that. I took a year-long intensive program because I think that's really important. For yourself to be the best leader that you can be. And I think we're always learning and always evolving. But also, how do you lead and evolve others in their path? And I think where I am right now is just sort of all of these worlds are coming together. And, I'm charting my own path. While I may have always been on that traditional path or started on that traditional path, but it's really, I think, and what, the time after my dad passed and sort of that moment in the Dolomites gave me was a time to step off. I always say the treadmill,
Yep.
to have this time of reflection of like, we all only have so much time. How do I want to use the rest of my time, and what kind of impact, I want to have, and how am I best poised to do that?
That's like recalibrating, re-energizing,
Yeah.
going out there and being the best version of you that you want to be.
Yes.
And I think, I mean, I see everywhere, and I'm not stalking you on LinkedIn, I promise, but it seems your expertise is being called on all over the place. You do a lot of advisory work with people. So I guess for you now is that, how do I want that to look for me moving forward? And I think certainly, as you were saying, with those smaller growing that the skills that you've armed yourself with now are away from big pharma into that much more consultative role with people, to the smaller companies that need a more consultative, wearer of many hats role than big pharma does, where you're in your box. Well, I've always believed that big pharma, this is your box. And those people, there are people that are happy in that box, and it's a big enough box
Right.
for them. You strike me as somebody that very quickly would outgrow that box and almost be kind of pushing the sides of the box to say, okay, we need to expand this box. But being in that situation, you are the wearer of many hats. You are being called on for
Right.
different skill sets, for different inputs into things. Is that the new Deanna? Is that where you see yourself going forward?
Yeah, I think a couple of things, whether it was intentional or not. I think, again, I'll go back to the curiosity. I've built my career on, I'm very much a systems thinker. And I have experience across, from leading brands to analytics to new product planning to business development to growth strategy, enterprise strategy. I've done a lot. And I think with where I am now, it's a couple of things. As I mentioned, really being part, the ideal is finding the right company that is building and growing to be part of that executive leadership team that to bring really something transformative to the marketplace. I also, the advising, there's no shortage. I think when you think of the times that we're in, and it's been a tough job market now. I think that's so when opportunity, there's so many people starting companies.
Yep.
But I think the thing about my experience in what I've seen with being able to help early stage founders is I'm able to bring all those collective experiences to them. So
Yep.
I want to continue to do that, whether it's, as an advisor, a board member, guiding people, because there's no shortage of opportunities to improve healthcare.
Absolutely.
Yes.
And that's your focus, isn't it? That's kind of been what you've said throughout our conversation. Healthcare needs changing. It needs
Yes.
work. And I'm really keen to get involved in playing a part in that in some shape or form.
Yes. Yes.
Right. Last question. Superpower. Would you say you have one?
Yes.
What is it?
What is it? I think it's two things. Well, the biggest one is the ability to see around corners.
Literally or metaphorically? So I just had a vision there of Deanna looking straight and going, oh, I know what's coming around the corner.
Do I want to go right or left, depending on what I know is around the corner? No, I think, I can't remember if we had talked about this, but I took one of those leadership assessment tests. I think it was the Hogan. And I just remember the debrief with the leadership coach. And he had highlighted this, and I always knew, like, there are things that I am able to see ahead, and where a business is going to run into something, or where there's going to be a problem. So how do you prepare for it versus
Right.
I believe in being proactive. We're in a stronger position when we're able to be proactive versus being reactive.
Yep.
Thing. But I remember he said, which I didn't quite understand, he goes, do you realize that some people may find you eccentric? And I was like, I don't even know how to respond to that. What do you want me to do with that? But then which was a weird choice of words for what he went on to say, but he said that, like, I have that ability to see ahead, and it's the importance of always having somebody. Sometimes it's so clear to me where we need to go,
Right.
but when you need to bring others along too, and I've had, people that I've had the pleasure of working with. I'm chuckling to myself, hearing a few in my mind right now saying,
pleasure of working with that.
Yeah, it's so clear in your mind, and I want to know what's in your mind. So, that's, I mean, to me, it's a superpower, but it's also an awareness of, like, it's only a superpower too if I'm able to bring others along with it. Yeah. And I think the other things is what I was talking about. Like, for me, that I naturally integrate things, and, it's as a systems thinker does. So I don't I have always not just saw the world, I see the world from this point of view or that point of view. I'm able to, whether it's thinking about the healthcare ecosystem and thinking about a doctor, a patient, an advocacy group, a patient, a caregiver, R&D, like I'm able to, like I just can naturally think about all the different things that we need to be thinking about. So I do think
it's almost like it's all up there and you can just kind of go, oh yeah, dump,
yeah,
and then it just kind of makes sense.
it makes sense.
Yeah.
And I think that's indicative of people that have that ability to be a systems thinker.
Right. Yeah. Which
Yeah.
I look at things like that and then they all still stay jumbled up like that. And I go, let's have a creative thought that comes out from there. Well, listen, Deanna, I can't believe how long we've been chatting for. It's felt like it was 2 seconds, but I really appreciate you taking the time out to spend some time with us today. Please, please, please proceed and do something in the healthcare to fix it, because as a Brit here in the US, coming from one extreme to the other, the system definitely needs a little bit of work. And I'm pretty confident that if there's anybody out there that can have some major input into that, it's you. So I wish you every success with that and everything else that you do. And I do hope we can stay in touch.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for the opportunity. It was fun to chat with you on a Friday afternoon. And as you said, there's no shortage of opportunity in healthcare and to improve it for all of us. So
yeah, let's all get on that page and make that happen.
Yes, I'm on it.
Excellent. Excellent. Well, listen, have a fabulous weekend and hopefully we'll catch up soon.
That sounds great, Sharon. Thank you so much again.
Take care.
All right. Bye-bye.
Well, that's it for today's episode. Thank you so much for listening. She Leads Biotech is brought to you by CNA International USA, a woman-owned boutique search firm based in New York. If you're looking to hire talent for your company or want support in achieving your career goals, please reach out to me at contact@cnaint.com. I hope you enjoyed this conversation. And remember, the success of every woman should be an inspiration to another. So don't be afraid to share yours. Thanks again for listening. Until next time.